Top 1. The Shardana Warriors. In 1274 BCE, during the reign of Pharaoh Ramesses II, Egyptian forces clashed with a formidable enemy at the Battle of Kadesh. Among the warriors depicted on temple walls were men unlike any Egypt had faced before. They wore horned helmets crowned with circular discs, carried long swords and round shields, and fought with disciplined precision. These warriors were known as the Shardana. They first appeared as invaders from the sea, fierce enough to challenge one of the most powerful empires on earth. Yet within a single generation, they became the pharaoh's most trusted elite guards. And then, without warning, they vanished from history. The Shardana entered the historical record through Egyptian inscriptions describing relentless maritime raids across the Mediterranean during the Late Bronze Age. Reliefs at Medinet Habu and Abu Simbel portray them in striking detail, their equipment distinct and consistent, suggesting a unified and highly organized warrior culture. Unlike scattered raiders, the Shardana operated with coordination and tactical sophistication. Their combat effectiveness was so impressive that after being captured, many were not executed or enslaved but recruited. They became royal bodyguards entrusted with protecting the pharaoh himself, a role reserved only for the most elite and reliable warriors. Archaeological and iconographic evidence indicates that the Shardana were part of a broader network often associated with the Sea Peoples, groups linked to the widespread collapse of late Bronze Age civilizations around 1200 BCE. Major powers such as the Hittites and Mycenaeans fell, trade networks disintegrated, and entire regions descended into instability. Amid this upheaval, the Shardana transitioned seamlessly from feared invaders to integrated military elites within imperial systems, particularly Egypt. Their presence is clearly documented in military records, artistic depictions, and royal inscriptions, confirming that they were not a minor or transient group, but a recognized and influential force. Then the record stops. After the 12th century BCE, references to the Shardana as a distinct people disappear. There are no chronicles of their defeat, no accounts of mass migration, and no identifiable homeland conclusively tied to them. Some scholars associate them with Sardinia, supported by similarities between Shardana depictions and the later Nuragic warrior figures, as well as the island's name. Yet this connection remains circumstantial rather than definitive. No inscriptions in their own language have been found. No royal lineage, cities, or administrative records can be confidently attributed to them. What remains is evidence of absorption. As empires like Egypt restructured and new Iron Age societies emerged, the Shardana seem to have dissolved into the populations they once confronted and served. Their identity faded while their people likely endured, their legacy embedded invisibly within Mediterranean cultures. Unlike civilizations that left ruins or scripts, the Shardana left only images carved by others, a people defined entirely through foreign eyes. Their disappearance reflects a recurring historical pattern. When powerful empires expand, they do not always destroy their rivals. Sometimes they absorb them so completely that their original identity ceases to exist. Names vanish, languages fall silent, histories are rewritten by those who remain. If an elite warrior society capable of challenging and then protecting the Egyptian empire could disappear without a trace, how many other powerful peoples were erased not by defeat, but by assimilation into the very empires they once opposed? Top 2. The Kingdom of Dilmun. In 1880 BCE, merchants traveling between Mesopotamia and the distant cities of the Indus Valley recorded a final series of transactions through a prosperous trading hub known as Dilmun. Clay tablets documented shipments of copper, ivory, pearls, and rare woods passing through its ports with remarkable efficiency. Then within just a few generations, these detailed records began to fade. Trade routes shifted, references diminished. Eventually the name Dilmun, once synonymous with wealth and perfection, receded into myth. A thriving civilization did not collapse in fire or conquest. It simply slipped out of history. Dilmun occupied a strategic position in the Persian Gulf, centered primarily on what is now Bahrain, with influence extending along the eastern Arabian coast. Its location made it the indispensable intermediary between Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley civilization. Archaeological excavations have uncovered vast burial mounds numbering in the tens of thousands, meticulously planned settlements, advanced water management systems, and a thriving port infrastructure. Standardized weights, seals, and administrative artifacts reveal a sophisticated and highly organized commercial society deeply integrated into international trade networks. Mesopotamian texts describe Dilmun not merely as a trading partner, but as a place of purity and perfection. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, it was portrayed as a sacred land, untouched by disease and death, a paradise at the edge of the known world. Yet beneath this almost mythical reputation was a powerful economic engine. Copper from Oman flowed through Dilmun to Mesopotamian cities, while goods from the Indus Valley passed through its ports, making it one of the most critical commercial hubs of the Bronze Age. Dilmun's prosperity was inseparable from its contact with advanced civilizations. Its administrative systems mirrored Mesopotamian models, and its trade depended heavily on the stability of distant empires. This interdependence became its greatest vulnerability. Around 2000 BCE, the Indus Valley civilization began to decline, disrupting Eastern trade. Soon after, Mesopotamia entered periods of political fragmentation and transformation. As emerging powers and evolving maritime routes reshaped regional commerce, Dilmun's strategic advantage eroded. By the mid-second millennium BCE, Dilmun had fallen under the influence and eventual control of Mesopotamian powers, particularly the Kassites of Babylon. Administrative references continued, but the tone had changed. Dilmun was no longer an equal trading partner. It had become a managed territory within a larger imperial system. Over time, mentions grew sparse and increasingly administrative in nature, stripped of cultural identity. By the first millennium BCE, the name Dilmun had effectively vanished from contemporary records, replaced by new regional designations under successive empires, including the Persians. There is no consistent archaeological evidence of widespread destruction, mass graves, or catastrophic abandonment. Settlements persisted, populations endured, trade continued in altered forms. What disappeared was the identity of Dilmun as an independent civilization. Its culture was absorbed, its administrative structures replaced, and its legacy fragmented into the bureaucratic frameworks of empires that followed. Ironically, Dilmun survived most vividly in myth. While its political and cultural identity faded from the living world, Mesopotamian literature preserved it as an eternal paradise. For centuries, its true location remained uncertain, its existence debated until modern archaeology reconnected the legend to the island of Bahrain. By then, the civilization itself had long been erased from historical continuity. Satellite imaging and ongoing excavations continue to reveal extensive urban layouts, harbor systems, and burial landscapes beneath modern development. These discoveries confirm that Dilmun was not a minor outpost, but a dominant economic power whose disappearance cannot be explained by destruction alone. Instead, it reflects a quieter and more enduring process: absorption through imperial integration and shifting global systems. If a civilization once revered as the gateway between the world's greatest empires could be absorbed so completely that it survived only as a legend, how many other ancient powers were transformed into myth simply because stronger empires rewrote the map and the memory of history? Top 3. The Amorites. In 2004 BCE, the mighty walls of Ur, one of the greatest cities of Mesopotamia, fell under relentless pressure from invading forces and internal collapse. Among the groups moving into the power vacuum were the Amorites, a people long described in Mesopotamian records as outsiders from the western deserts. Initially portrayed as nomadic intruders who knew no grain and lived in tents, they were seen as uncivilized by the urban societies they approached. Yet within just a few generations, these same outsiders would rise to rule the very heart of Mesopotamian civilization. And then, after reshaping the ancient world, they disappeared from history as a distinct people. The Amorites originated from the regions west of the Euphrates, likely in what is now Syria. Rather than invading in a single overwhelming wave, they migrated gradually, settling along trade routes and fertile lands. As Mesopotamia weakened due to climate stress, political fragmentation, and external pressures, Amorite leaders seized strategic opportunities. They established dynasties across key cities, including Mari, Larsa, Eshnunna, and most famously, Babylon. Their ascent was not merely military, but administrative and cultural, demonstrating a remarkable ability to govern complex urban societies. The pinnacle of Amorite power came with Hammurabi of Babylon, who ruled from 1792 to 1750 BCE. Under his leadership, Babylon transformed from a modest city-state into a dominant regional empire. Hammurabi's legal code, inscribed on a towering basalt stele, became one of the most enduring symbols of ancient law and governance. Amorite rulers adopted Mesopotamian writing, religion, architecture, and bureaucracy, seamlessly integrating into the civilization they once approached as outsiders. Their names, however, preserved their heritage, and for centuries their Amorite identity remained visible in royal lineages and administrative records. Yet this success carried the seeds of their erasure. The Amorites did not impose a separate cultural system. Instead, they fully embraced and reinforced Mesopotamian traditions. As new powers emerged, including the Hittites from Anatolia and the Kassites from the Zagros Mountains, Babylon's Amorite dynasty came to an abrupt end when the Hittites sacked the city in 1595 BCE. Soon after, the Kassites assumed control, maintaining Babylonian culture while reshaping its political structure. What followed was not displacement, but absorption. References to the Amorites as a distinct ethnic or political group steadily vanished from written records. No chronicles describe their destruction, no archaeological layer marks their sudden disappearance. Their cities remained vibrant, their institutions intact, and their populations continuous. The Amorites simply merged into the broader Mesopotamian world they had mastered. Their language faded, their tribal affiliations dissolved, and their identity was replaced by Babylonian and Assyrian cultural continuity. Cuneiform archives, once filled with references to Amorite individuals and dynasties, grew silent on the name. Later empires that meticulously documented peoples, territories, and conquests made no mention of the Amorites as a living group. Genetic and cultural continuity suggests they never left. Instead, they became indistinguishable from the populations they once ruled. Their greatest achievement, complete integration into advanced urban civilization, ensured their historical disappearance. Unlike civilizations erased by catastrophe, the Amorites vanished through success. They conquered the system, became the system, and were ultimately absorbed by it. Their legacy endured in law, governance, and imperial structure, yet their identity dissolved so completely that it survived only in ancient texts and archaeological interpretation. If a people capable of founding empires and shaping the legal foundations of civilization could vanish without migration, destruction, or exile, how many other nations were erased not by defeat, but by becoming indistinguishable from the empires they helped build? Top 4. The Kassites of Babylon. In 1595 BCE, Babylon, the greatest city of Mesopotamia, fell to an unexpected and swift assault by the Hittites. The invaders looted its temples, carried off sacred statues, and then withdrew just as abruptly as they had arrived. The sudden power vacuum left the region exposed and unstable. From the shadowed Zagros Mountains to the east emerged a people scarcely known to the urban world of Mesopotamia. They were the Kassites. Within a remarkably short time, they seized control of Babylon, and over the next 4 centuries, they would rule one of the ancient world's most prestigious civilizations. Yet despite their long and stable reign, the Kassites would eventually disappear so completely that their identity survives only in fragments scattered across foreign records and broken inscriptions. The Kassites were first mentioned in Mesopotamian texts as highland tribes, peripheral and largely insignificant to the great powers of the time. Their language bore no clear relation to the dominant linguistic families of the region, and their cultural origins remained obscure even to their contemporaries. But after Babylon's fall, they did not merely conquer the city. They transformed themselves into its guardians. Establishing what historians now call the Kassite dynasty, they ruled Babylon from approximately 1595 to 1155 BCE, marking one of the longest and most stable periods in Babylonian history. Rather than imposing their own culture, the Kassites adopted Babylonian language, religion, administration, and legal systems with striking thoroughness. They restored temples, revived economic networks, and re-established Babylon as a diplomatic powerhouse. Correspondence preserved in the Amarna letters reveals Kassite kings communicating as equals with the rulers of Egypt, the Hittite Empire, and Mitanni. Their capital at Dur-Kurigalzu featured monumental architecture, including towering ziggurats and expansive administrative complexes, demonstrating both engineering capability and centralized authority. Yet the Kassites left behind remarkably little of their own cultural voice. Their language appears only in limited inscriptions, personal names, and specialized terms, many related to horses and chariotry. Distinctive boundary stones known as kuduru recorded land grants and displayed intricate carvings of divine symbols, serving as enduring markers of Kassite governance. Still, beyond these artifacts, their native traditions remain largely invisible, overshadowed by the Babylonian civilization they so effectively preserved. The beginning of their disappearance was gradual and almost imperceptible. By the late 2nd millennium BCE, Babylon faced mounting pressure from external forces, particularly the Elamites from the east and Assyria from the north. Around 1155 BCE, Elamite forces invaded Babylon, capturing the city and carrying off its treasures, including the revered statue of Marduk. Kassite political authority collapsed, yet there is no evidence of mass extermination, forced migration, or widespread societal rupture. Cities remained populated, institutions endured, and Babylonian culture continued uninterrupted under successive rulers. What vanished was the Kassite identity itself. Within a few generations, references to the Kassites as a distinct people faded from historical records. Later Assyrian and Babylonian texts, meticulous in cataloging conquered nations and subject populations, scarcely acknowledge them as a living group. Their language disappeared entirely. Their traditions dissolved into the dominant Babylonian framework. Archaeology reveals continuity of life, not destruction. The Kassites did not fall in flames. They faded into the civilization they had ruled and preserved. Their story presents a paradox. Few foreign dynasties governed a major civilization for so long and so successfully. Yet that very success ensured their erasure. By embracing Babylon completely, they left history with a stable empire, but without a surviving Kassite identity. If a people could rule Babylon for 4 centuries and still vanish without a trace of cultural continuity, how many other ancient identities were quietly erased, not by conquest alone, but by the overwhelming gravity of empire? Top 5. The Kingdom of Arzawa. In 1350 BCE, diplomatic letters written in careful Akkadian script crossed the eastern Mediterranean, traveling between royal courts that shaped the fate of the ancient world. Among them were messages exchanged between the pharaoh of Egypt and a ruler named Tarhundaradu of Arzawa. The tone was unmistakable. These were not communications with a minor frontier state, but with a recognized power, treated as an equal among the great kingdoms of the late Bronze Age. Arzawa stood alongside Egypt, the Hittites, and Mitanni in the diplomatic network preserved in what would later be known as the Amarna Letters. Yet within little more than a century, this prominent kingdom vanished so completely that its capital remains uncertain, and its identity survives only in fragments written by its rivals. Arzawa occupied the fertile and strategically vital regions of western Anatolia. Likely centered near what is now the Aegean coast of Turkey, its position allowed it to control key trade routes connecting the Anatolian interior with the Mediterranean world. Archaeological and linguistic evidence suggests strong connections with Luwian-speaking populations and possible interactions with Mycenaean Greece. Material culture, including pottery and architectural styles, reflects a dynamic society engaged in both regional and international exchange. Arzawa was not isolated. It was deeply embedded in the political and economic fabric of the Bronze Age world. To the east, however, lay a formidable rival, the Hittite Empire. For decades, Arzawa and the Hittites contested control over western Anatolia. Hittite records describe Arzawa as a persistent and capable adversary, one that could form alliances, incite rebellions among Hittite vassals, and exploit moments of imperial weakness. At times, Arzawa emerged as the dominant power in the region, particularly when internal crises and external pressures strained Hittite authority. Its diplomatic engagement with Egypt was likely part of a strategic effort to counterbalance Hittite expansion, positioning Arzawa as a central player in the geopolitical chessboard of the late Bronze Age. The turning point came in the 14th century BCE under the Hittite king Suppiluliuma and later his successor Mursili II. Hittite military campaigns, described in detailed royal annals, pushed deep into Arzawan territory. Cities were besieged and captured, and Arzawa's ruler fled, reportedly seeking refuge in Mycenaean-controlled lands across the sea. Rather than annihilating the region, the Hittites dismantled Arzawa's centralized power and reorganized its territory into smaller vassal states, including Mira, Seha Riverland, and Hapala. This administrative restructuring ensured control while preventing the reemergence of a unified rival. After this transformation, the name Arzawa rapidly disappeared from historical records. The lands remained inhabited and economically active. Trade continued, settlements endured, and political structures persisted under new identities. Yet the designation Arzawa ceased to exist as a political or cultural entity. There is no clear archaeological layer marking a final destruction, no mass abandonment of cities, and no record of a migrating population preserving the name elsewhere. Instead, the kingdom dissolved into the imperial framework of the Hittites and later into the shifting powers that followed the Bronze Age collapse. The mystery deepens with the absence of definitive archaeological identification of Arzawa's capital, often associated with the site of Apasa, possibly near later Ephesus. Despite extensive research in a region rich with ancient remains, no discovery has conclusively confirmed the administrative heart of a kingdom once recognized by Egypt as a diplomatic equal. Its physical and political center remains elusive, as though the core of Arzawa was absorbed and overwritten by successive civilizations. Arzawa's disappearance was not marked by silence in the land, but by silence in the name. Its people continued, its cities evolved, and its culture flowed into the Luwian and later Anatolian and Greek worlds. Yet the identity that once stood among the great powers of its age was systematically replaced through imperial integration and administrative redesign. If a kingdom powerful enough to negotiate with pharaohs could be erased so thoroughly that even its capital remains uncertain, how many other ancient powers were not destroyed, but simply renamed until their existence faded from memory? Top 6. The Luwians. In the early 20th century, archaeologists excavating the ruins of ancient Anatolia uncovered inscriptions written in a script unlike the well-known cuneiform of Mesopotamia or the hieroglyphs of Egypt. Carved into stone monuments, stamped onto seals, and etched across forgotten city walls were symbols belonging to a civilization that had once dominated vast stretches of western and southern Anatolia. This civilization was not newly discovered. It had always been there, hidden in plain sight, overshadowed by the empires that documented history in their own names. These were the Luwians, a people whose influence shaped the late Bronze Age world, yet whose identity faded so completely that history nearly erased them. The Luwians spoke an Indo-European language and occupied a broad region across Anatolia as early as the 2nd millennium BCE. Unlike centralized empires such as the Hittites, the Luwians were organized into a network of powerful city-states and regional kingdoms. Their presence is preserved in both cuneiform texts and a distinctive Anatolian hieroglyphic script, used in monumental inscriptions that proclaim royal authority and recorded political events. Archaeological evidence reveals fortified cities, advanced metallurgy, complex road networks, and thriving trade connections linking the Aegean, the Near East, and the Mediterranean. Far from being peripheral, the Luwians formed one of the structural foundations of Anatolian civilization. Throughout the height of the Hittite Empire, Luwian-speaking populations were deeply embedded within imperial administration, military command, and regional governance. Many Western Anatolian kingdoms, including Arzawa and Mira, were culturally and linguistically Luwian. Their proximity to Mycenaean Greece positioned them at the crossroads of international trade and diplomacy. Some scholars have even proposed connections between Luwian regions and the legendary setting of Troy, suggesting that the geopolitical tensions reflected in later Greek epics may have originated within this Luwian world. The late Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE shattered the established order across the eastern Mediterranean. The Hittite Empire fell, Mycenaean palaces burned, and long-standing trade networks disintegrated. In the aftermath, Luwian-speaking states did not vanish immediately. Instead, they re-emerged as Neo-Hittite or Syro-Anatolian kingdoms, such as Carchemish, Melid, and Tabal. These states preserved Luwian language and hieroglyphic writing, erecting monumental inscriptions that documented rulers, conquests, and divine legitimacy. For a time, Luwian identity remained vibrant and visible. Then came the Assyrian expansion. Beginning in the 9th century BCE and intensifying in the 8th, the Neo-Assyrian Empire advanced relentlessly into Anatolia and Syria. Through a combination of military conquest, forced deportations, administrative restructuring, and cultural integration, Assyria dismantled the independent Luwian-speaking kingdoms. Royal inscriptions from Assyrian rulers meticulously recorded the annexation of these territories, the relocation of populations, and their reorganization into imperial provinces. Aramaic, favored for administration and trade, spread rapidly, while imperial systems replaced local governance. As generations passed, Luwian hieroglyphic inscriptions ceased. The language disappeared from official use and eventually from daily life. There was no singular catastrophic event marking the end of the Luwians. Their cities remained inhabited, their descendants lived on, and their lands continued to thrive under new administrations. Yet their distinct identity dissolved into the expanding cultural and linguistic landscape dominated by Assyria and later empires. For centuries, their disappearance was so complete that historians mistook their achievements for those of the Hittites or other neighboring cultures. Only with the decipherment of Luwian hieroglyphs in the 20th century did the true scale of their civilization emerge. An entire cultural sphere, once central to the ancient world, had been obscured not by destruction, but by absorption and historical overshadowing. Their monuments still stand across Anatolia, silent witnesses to a people whose name was erased while their legacy endured within the civilizations that replaced them. The Luwians were not annihilated. They were rewritten. If a civilization vast enough to shape the political and cultural landscape of the Bronze and Iron Age Mediterranean could vanish so completely that history forgot it for millennia, how many other erased peoples remain hidden beneath the identities imposed by empires? Top 7. The Kingdom of Ebla. In 1974, a team of archaeologists excavating a dusty mound known as Tel Mardik in northern Syria uncovered a palace buried beneath layers of ash and collapsed stone. Inside, they found thousands of clay tablets stacked on shelves that had fallen and hardened in fire, preserving their contents for over 4,000 years. These tablets revealed the existence of Ebla, a powerful and sophisticated kingdom that had once dominated trade and diplomacy across the ancient Near East. Until that moment, Ebla had been little more than a disputed name in scattered Mesopotamian texts. Its rediscovery exposed a startling truth. A major civilization had risen, thrived, and vanished so completely that history had nearly erased it. At its height, around 2500 to 2300 BCE, Ebla controlled a vast network of trade routes stretching from Mesopotamia to the Mediterranean and deep into Anatolia and the Levant. Its strategic location allowed it to function as a commercial and diplomatic hub, linking multiple civilizations. The palace archives, containing more than 17,000 tablets written in cuneiform, documented treaties, trade agreements, legal codes, tax records, and diplomatic correspondence. These records revealed a highly organized state with a complex bureaucracy, standardized economic systems, and an extensive network of allied and subordinate cities. Ebla's language, now known as Ablate, blended Semitic structure with strong Sumerian influence, reflecting deep cultural interaction with the advanced civilizations of Mesopotamia. The kingdom maintained formal diplomatic relations with major powers such as Kish and Mari, and its economy thrived on textiles, metals, timber, olive oil, and wine. Monumental architecture, administrative precision, and economic reach placed Ebla firmly among the great civilizations of the early Bronze Age. Ebla's first major fall came around 2300 BCE, most likely at the hands of the Akkadian Empire under Sargon of Akkad or his grandson Naram-Sin. Archaeological evidence shows intense destruction, with the palace engulfed in flames, an event that inadvertently preserved its archives. Yet Ebla was not erased. The city was rebuilt and re-emerged as a regional power during the early 2nd millennium BCE, operating within a landscape increasingly shaped by dominant empires such as Mari, Yamhad, and later the Hittites. This second Ebla did not fall in a single, clearly documented catastrophe. Instead, its political and cultural identity gradually dissolved amid shifting imperial dynamics. As larger and more centralized powers expanded, Ebla was absorbed into broader administrative and economic systems. By around 1600 BCE, likely during Hittite campaigns into Syria, the city was destroyed again. This time it did not return as an independent power. The site remained sparsely inhabited, and the name Ebla faded from contemporary records. What makes Ebla's disappearance particularly striking is not merely its destruction, but its complete erasure from historical memory. Unlike Egypt, Babylon, or the Hittites, Ebla left no continuous tradition to preserve its legacy. Later civilizations occupied the region without reference to the once dominant kingdom beneath their feet. Its archives, sealed by fire and buried by time, remained untouched and unknown for millennia. Without their accidental preservation, Ebla's existence as a major civilization might have remained forever obscured. There is no evidence of mass migration or a surviving population maintaining Eblate identity elsewhere. Instead, its people were absorbed into the cultural and political fabric of successive empires. Languages shifted, administrative systems changed, and collective memory was overwritten. Ebla did not vanish because its people disappeared, but because its identity was replaced and forgotten. Its rediscovery in the 20th century revealed how fragile historical memory truly is. A civilization with international diplomacy, vast trade networks, and advanced administration had been reduced to silence, remembered only by the earth that buried it. If a kingdom as powerful and interconnected as Ebla could vanish so completely that humanity forgot it for 4,000 years, how many other erased civilizations still lie hidden beneath cities we believe we already understand? Top 8. The Kingdom of Commagene. In 62 BCE, high atop a remote mountain in southeastern Anatolia, a royal sanctuary was completed under the command of King Antiochus of Commagene. At an elevation of over 7,000 feet, colossal stone statues depicting a fusion of Greek and Persian gods were arranged in solemn symmetry, gazing eternally across the horizon. Inscriptions carved into the rock proclaimed Antiochus not merely a king, but a divine bridge between civilizations, a ruler destined to unite East and West in both blood and belief. The monument was designed to endure forever, yet within less than a century the kingdom that built it vanished so completely that its existence faded into obscurity, leaving only silent stone witnesses atop Mount Nemrut. The kingdom of Commagene emerged in the early 2nd century BCE from the fragmentation of the Seleucid Empire. Positioned along the upper Euphrates, it occupied one of the most strategically vital corridors between the Mediterranean world and the Persian interior. This location made Commagene both a cultural crossroads and a geopolitical buffer between two expanding superpowers, Rome in the west and Parthia in the east. Rather than resisting this dual influence, Commagene embraced it. Its ruling dynasty claimed descent from both Persian Achaemenid kings and Alexander the Great, crafting a deliberate hybrid identity that blended Greek language and art with Persian religion and royal tradition. This synthesis reached its peak under Antiochus I, who ruled from approximately 70 to 31 BCE. At Mount Nemrut, he constructed a monumental funerary complex featuring colossal seated deities that combined Greek and Persian attributes, alongside statues of himself among them. Detailed inscriptions outlined his vision of a unified cultural and divine order, prescribing rituals to ensure his eternal remembrance. The sanctuary was not merely a tomb, but a declaration of identity, a deliberate attempt to preserve Commagene's uniqueness between rival empires. Yet Commagene's greatest strength, its position between powers, was also its greatest vulnerability. The kingdom survived through careful diplomacy, shifting allegiances between Rome and Parthia. Roman influence steadily deepened through political oversight, military presence, and economic integration. By 17 CE, Rome annexed Commagene as a province, only to briefly restore it as a client kingdom before permanently absorbing it in 72 CE under Emperor Vespasian. The transition was swift and administrative rather than catastrophic. There is no widespread archaeological evidence of destruction, mass displacement, or societal collapse. Instead, Roman governance replaced local authority, Latin and Greek administrative systems overshadowed native structures, and Commogene's aristocracy was absorbed into the Roman imperial framework. Trade flourished, cities remained active, and the population endured. Yet the political and cultural identity of Commagene dissolved rapidly. Within a few generations, it was no longer recognized as a distinct kingdom or people, but simply as part of the Roman provincial world, later blending into Byzantine and regional cultures. Unlike civilizations lost to ruin, Commagene was erased through seamless integration. Its language merged with the dominant Greek of the Eastern Roman Empire. Its religious traditions were absorbed into evolving Greco-Roman and later Christian frameworks, and its royal lineage disappeared into imperial aristocracy. Historical references to Commagene dwindled, preserved mainly in Roman administrative records and classical writings rather than in any surviving native tradition. For centuries, Mount Nemrut stood in isolation, its colossal statues toppled by earthquakes and buried in drifting stone and snow. The kingdom they commemorated faded so thoroughly from collective memory that when the site was rediscovered by a German engineer in 1881, the civilization behind it was scarcely understood. A kingdom that had meticulously engineered its remembrance had instead engineered a monument to its own disappearance. Commagene was not destroyed in war, nor consumed by disaster. It was absorbed so efficiently that its identity dissolved within the machinery of empire, leaving behind only monumental echoes of a people who once defined themselves as the meeting point of worlds. If a kingdom that carved its legacy into mountaintops could still be erased by administrative integration and cultural assimilation, how many other civilizations vanished just as completely, without leaving monuments high enough to be seen again? Top 9. The Kingdom of Urartu. In 1827, on the shores of Lake Van in eastern Anatolia, a scholar named Friedrich Eduard Schultz carefully copied strange wedge-shaped inscriptions carved into towering stone walls. The markings resembled Assyrian cuneiform, yet the language was unfamiliar. Before he could complete his work, Schultz was killed during regional unrest, and his notes were nearly lost. When they were finally recovered and studied, they revealed the voice of a forgotten empire. It was called Urartu, a kingdom powerful enough to rival Assyria. And yet, despite its strength, engineering brilliance, and military might, it had vanished so completely that even the civilizations that followed left only faint traces of its name. Urartu emerged in the 9th century BCE in the rugged highlands surrounding Lake Van, a region defined by volcanic mountains, harsh winters, and natural fortifications. Rather than being constrained by this environment, the Urartians mastered it. They constructed massive stone fortresses atop steep ridges using precisely cut basalt blocks, many of which remain standing today. These strongholds were connected by an advanced network of roads and supported by sophisticated irrigation systems. Canals stretching for dozens of miles transformed arid plains into fertile agricultural zones, some still in use in modified form. This infrastructure sustained a centralized and highly organized state capable of projecting power across eastern Anatolia, northwestern Iran, and parts of the South Caucasus. At its height in the 8th century BCE, Urartu stood as the principal rival to the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Assyrian kings such as Shalmaneser III, Tiglath-Pileser III, and Sargon II documented repeated campaigns against Urartu in detailed royal annals. These records describe formidable fortresses, well-equipped armies, and a resilient state that could recover quickly after military setbacks. Urartian inscriptions, carved into rock faces and fortress walls, reveal a kingdom with a structured administration, state-sponsored agriculture, organized religion centered on the god Haldi, and a strong tradition of metallurgy, particularly in iron and bronze. Yet the decline of Urartu did not unfold as a dramatic imperial collapse. By the late 7th century BCE, Assyria itself was weakening under pressure from the Medes and Babylonians. Simultaneously, nomadic groups such as the Scythians and Cimmerians swept through the region, destabilizing established political systems. Archaeological evidence from Urartian sites reveals episodes of destruction, including burned fortresses and abandoned settlements. But these events were uneven and fragmented. There is no single empire-wide destruction layer marking a definitive end. By the early 6th century BCE, Urartu had disappeared from historical records. In its place, new political entities emerged, most notably the region known as Armenia under the expanding Achaemenid Persian Empire. Persian administrative inscriptions refer to the area as Armenia, while earlier Assyrian sources had called it Urartu. This shift in terminology reflects not a depopulated landscape, but a transformed identity. Settlements continued, agriculture persisted, and cultural practices evolved. The people remained, but the name and political structure of Urartu dissolved into a new imperial and ethnic framework. Linguistically and culturally, the transformation was profound. The Urartian language related to Hurrian and written in adapted cuneiform vanished entirely, replaced by early forms of the Armenian language, an Indo-European tongue. Unlike empires that left enduring literary traditions, Urartu's written legacy was confined largely to royal inscriptions, offering no continuous narrative to preserve its identity after its political fall. As new powers consolidated control, memory of Urartu faded, absorbed into the emerging Armenian cultural and historical landscape. For centuries, the monumental fortresses and inscriptions scattered across the highlands were attributed to Assyrians, Persians, or even mythical giants. Only in the modern era did archaeology restore Urartu to its rightful place as a major ancient power. Its disappearance had been so complete that history itself required reconstruction to remember it. Urartu was not erased by a single conqueror nor annihilated in a final battle. It was transformed, absorbed, and renamed within the expanding systems of new empires. Its people endured, its lands remained inhabited, and its engineering legacy persisted, yet its identity as Urartu vanished from living memory. If a kingdom capable of rivaling Assyria and reshaping an entire landscape could disappear so thoroughly that it survived only in stone inscriptions, how many other ancient empires were not destroyed, but simply renamed until their existence was forgotten? Top 10. The Mitanni Kingdom. In 1887, a local farmer digging through the ruins of an ancient settlement at Tel El Amarna in Egypt uncovered a cache of clay tablets buried beneath the desert floor. These tablets, later known as the Amarna letters, revealed an intricate web of diplomatic correspondence between the great powers of the Late Bronze Age. Among the most prominent voices was that of a king named Tushratta, ruler of a powerful state called Mitanni. He addressed the pharaoh of Egypt as an equal, negotiating royal marriages, exchanging lavish gifts, and discussing matters of geopolitical balance. Yet within little more than a century of this diplomatic prominence, Mitanni disappeared so completely that even its capital remains unconfirmed. A kingdom once central to international diplomacy vanished into the margins of history. Mitanni emerged around the 16th century BCE in northern Mesopotamia and Syria, strategically positioned between the expanding powers of Egypt, the Hittites, and Assyria. Its strength rested on military innovation, particularly its mastery of horse training and chariot warfare. A remarkable Hittite text attributed to a Mitanni trainer named Kikuli details advanced conditioning techniques using timed intervals and controlled exertion, methods strikingly similar to modern endurance training. This technological and tactical advantage allowed Mitanni to dominate the region and command respect from neighboring empires. What made Mitanni uniquely enigmatic was its cultural composition. The majority of its population was Hurrian, yet its ruling elite bore Indo-Aryan names and invoked deities such as Mitra, Varuna, Indra, and the Nasatyas in royal treaties, especially in agreements with the Hittites. These linguistic and religious traces, closely aligned with early Vedic traditions of South Asia, appeared thousands of miles from their later historical heartland. The presence of such elements suggested a complex and layered identity, one that connected distant regions through movements of elites, technologies, or traditions that remain only partially understood. At its height in the 15th and early 14th centuries BCE, Mitanni controlled critical trade routes and fertile territories, maintaining a delicate balance of power with Egypt while countering Hittite ambitions. Diplomatic marriages between Mitannian princesses and Egyptian pharaohs, including Amenhotep III, reinforced this alliance. For a time, Mitanni stood firmly among the great powers of the ancient Near East, its authority recognized across the diplomatic world. The unraveling began not with sudden destruction, but with mounting geopolitical pressure. The Hittite Empire, revitalized under Suppiluliuma I, launched decisive campaigns into Mitannian territory, capturing key cities and installing rival rulers. Simultaneously, Assyria, once a Mitannian subordinate, rose in strength and asserted its independence. Caught between these expanding empires, Mitanni fragmented into competing factions, weakening its central authority. Eventually, its remaining territories were absorbed, primarily by Assyria, which reorganized the region into a province known as Hanagalbat. What is most striking is the absence of a clear archaeological signature marking Mitanni's final collapse. There is no definitive destruction layer across its core territories, and its capital, Washukani, though widely studied and debated, has never been conclusively identified. Instead, the disappearance of Mitanni is documented mainly through the records of its conquerors. Within a few generations, its royal lineage vanished, its political identity dissolved, and its language faded from administrative use. Hurrian traditions were absorbed, and the Indo-Aryan elements that once defined its elite disappeared entirely from the region. Yet the population endured. Settlements continued under Assyrian rule, and cultural elements blended into the broader imperial framework. Mitanni was not erased through annihilation, but through systematic integration. Its institutions were dismantled, its elites replaced or assimilated, and its identity rewritten within the administrative structure of a rising empire. Without monumental inscriptions rivaling those of Egypt or Assyria, Mitanni's legacy survived only in scattered texts preserved by others. For centuries, Mitanni existed as little more than a scholarly puzzle reconstructed from foreign archives. A kingdom that once shaped the balance of power in the ancient world had been reduced to fragments of correspondence and elusive archaeological traces. If a civilization influential enough to negotiate as an equal with Egypt and reshape the warfare of its era could disappear without a confirmed capital or clear record of its fall, how many other ancient powers were erased simply because the empires that absorbed them controlled the story that followed? These ancient peoples did not vanish in fire or catastrophe. They disappeared in silence, absorbed into the expanding machinery of empires that reshaped identities, languages, and memory itself. The Shardana, Dilmunites, Amorites, Kassites, Arzawans, Luwians, Eblates, Commagenians, Urartians, and Mitannians were not erased through sudden annihilation, but through a far more enduring process. Assimilation, administrative restructuring, linguistic replacement, and cultural integration transformed once distinct civilizations into indistinguishable parts of larger imperial systems. What remained were cities still inhabited, landscapes still cultivated, and populations still alive, but stripped of the identities that once defined them. Across different regions and centuries, a consistent pattern emerges. Expanding empires did not rely solely on conquest to secure dominance. They imposed administrative languages, reorganized territories, absorbed local elites, and redefined cultural and religious frameworks. Over generations, original identities faded from official records and collective memory. Scripts ceased to be written, native names disappeared from inscriptions, and histories were rewritten from the perspective of imperial power. The absence of destruction layers in many of these regions reveals a quieter, more systematic transformation. Erasure was achieved not by eliminating people, but by redefining who they were. The consequences of this process extend far beyond the ancient world. Each lost identity represents vanished languages, forgotten belief systems, erased technologies, and cultural knowledge that might have reshaped humanity's understanding of its own past. Archaeology continues to uncover fragments of these forgotten worlds, suggesting that what has been rediscovered may represent only a fraction of what once existed. The historical record, long treated as authoritative, increasingly appears selective, shaped by those who possess the power to document and preserve their own narratives. This pattern of erasure did not end in antiquity. Systems of power continue to shape historical narratives, elevate certain voices, and obscure others. Archives remain classified, discoveries are filtered through institutional frameworks, and interpretations are influenced by prevailing paradigms. What is known may be only a curated portion of what has been discovered, while countless identities remain buried beneath modern cities, shifting deserts, and unexamined landscapes. The true question is not whether entire peoples were erased from history. The evidence makes that clear. The deeper question is how many more have already been forgotten, their stories overwritten so completely that humanity no longer realizes they ever existed. If these stories of vanished empires changed how you look at the maps of our world, please subscribe and like the channel. We are unearthing the history they tried to bury. Help us plant the seeds of the future. The next treasury of the past will be open soon.